she always looked like she had it all together. Driven, intelligent, composed. But behind that curated exterior was a woman constantly battling with an unforgiving inner voice. Not many would guess that beneath her polished achievements lived a storm of self-criticism. What appeared as ambition to the world was often a frantic attempt to silence the relentless judgment she hurled at herself daily. This wasn't just ambition, it was survival. Her success wasn't born solely from passion, but from the pressure to be good enough, to make the unease disappear. Yet perfectionism, that beautifully packaged poison, is a game without a finish line. It's a treadmill that speeds up the more you chase, making stillness feel like failure. Somewhere along the way, she began to feel a quiet rift forming between her and the world around her. Conversations that seemed vibrant on the surface began to feel hollow. Compliments lost their warmth. Laughter at gatherings sounded rehearsed. The world kept spinning, louder and busier, but something in her whispered that none of it felt true. At first, she blamed herself. Maybe she was too serious, too skeptical, too cold. But eventually, a deeper clarity surfaced. Maybe she wasn't disconnected at all. Maybe she had simply woken up in a world built on polite performances and transactional smiles. Once you start noticing the patterns, it's impossible to stop. You see the forced pleasantries, the hunger for validation masked as friendship, the small betrayals of authenticity people commit just to fit in. It's jarring. And once awareness roots itself, the dissonance between what's said and what's meant becomes unbearable. People rarely pause long enough to question who they've become. Their identities are stitched from expectations, fears, and echoes of other people's beliefs. They nod when they want to scream. They smile while shrinking inside. They follow scripts handed down generations before they ever had a chance to write their own. This is the theatre of fitting in, and few realize they're on stage. As philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer once observed, most social behavior is not about connection, but about avoidance. Avoidance of rejection, avoidance of discomfort, avoidance of being labeled difficult. In this performance, applause comes in the form of approval, and stepping out of line feels like social suicide. And it works because we are wired for belonging. We want to be liked. We want to be invited back. But the currency of belonging is steep when it requires selling parts of yourself piece by piece to remain palatable. Women learn this trade earlier and with more intensity. Be pleasant, be agreeable, don't speak too loudly, don't challenge too directly. Smile even when your soul aches. Say yes when your boundaries beg for a no. This is what's rewarded. Likeability over honesty, silence over clarity, blending in over standing up. So when a woman stops performing, it unsettles the room. Because she's not just breaking the rules, she's reminding everyone that there were rules to begin with. It's not arrogance, it's not detachment. It's the moment when integrity becomes louder than expectation. She begins to speak with fewer filters. She doesn't laugh to fill space. She doesn't compliment out of obligation. And suddenly, people shift. The warmth cools. The invitations slow. The praise turns sharp. You've changed, they say, as if growth were betrayal. But it's not betrayal. It's return. Return to what was always inside her before the world layered her in roles she never chose. Because being awake in a world that rewards sleepwalking is a lonely path. And yet, it's the only path where her steps finally feel her own. As she began to live more truthfully, a strange pattern emerged. Clarity, though empowering, came with a cost. Some people faded from her life like background noise, once the volume of authenticity rose. Relationships that had once seemed solid began to wobble under the weight of unspoken truths. It wasn't that she had become unkind. She had simply stopped padding her words in bubble wrap. She didn't soften her opinions just to keep the peace, nor did she mirror other people's expectations like she used to. She wasn't trying to provoke, but her honesty, once filtered and diluted, now arrived uncut. And that's where the discomfort started. We often believe people want honesty. What they usually mean is, tell me the truth, but make it comfortable. Make it affirming. Make sure it doesn't ask anything of me. But real truth, the kind that pulls at the threads of illusion, unsettles. It brings light to shadows we'd rather keep hidden. And when a woman chooses truth over acceptance, she's no longer safe, for others, or even for herself. She begins to notice things others avoid. The way people laugh to avoid crying. The way friendships revolve around complaining, but never changing. The way some relationships are built entirely on one person shrinking, so the other can shine. These aren't just red flags, they're patterns. And once you see them, pretending not to becomes a form of betrayal to yourself. But when you refuse to betray yourself, others may feel betrayed instead. They might accuse you of being cold, or too much, or emotionally unavailable. But the truth is, you're simply not available for performance anymore. And when you drop the mask, people who only loved your mask start to disappear. At first, this loss feels like failure. You might spiral into guilt, questioning whether honesty is worth the isolation. But here's the shift. Eventually, the grief makes space for something you haven't felt in years: peace. Not the peace of being liked, the peace of being real. It's a quieter peace, one that doesn't rely on applause or echo chambers. It's the kind of peace that allows you to be misunderstood without needing to rush in and fix the narrative. The kind that lets you walk away without over-explaining. The kind that no longer ties your self-worth to how digestible you are to others. This is where power begins to grow. Because power isn't always loud. Sometimes it's the refusal to explain yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you. Sometimes it's the quiet decision to stop asking people to meet you in places.
Thanks so much for watching this far. If you're enjoying the video, a like and subscribe would mean the world to me. Feel free to drop a comment. I'd love to hear what you think or how you relate to this. Your support keeps this channel going, and I truly appreciate you being here.
They're not ready to enter. Sometimes it's the stillness that follows a decade of over-functioning. It's the choice to disappoint others rather than abandon yourself. That's not selfishness, that's liberation. This part of the journey often feels raw. Old patterns pull at your sleeves, begging you to return. To be smaller, more agreeable, less threatening. But you've tasted the truth now, and truth, once known, cannot be unlived. You realize that while the world celebrates loud confidence, it often fears quiet conviction. You become someone who no longer needs to prove herself. You don't hustle to be chosen. You don't perform for belonging. You embody your worth without seeking permission. And slowly, the loneliness begins to transform. You meet others who've chosen truth too. Not many, but enough. People who don't flinch at your honesty, who don't need you to be smaller to feel big, who know the difference between intimacy and enmeshment. With them, you can exhale. You can stop translating yourself. You can just be. These aren't just friends. They are soul mirrors, and their presence confirms what you've always hoped. You were never too much. You were simply in the wrong rooms. Now, you're building your own. There comes a moment, after the masks have been dropped and the noise quieted, when you meet yourself, not the version shaped by survival, but the one who has waited patiently beneath all the layers. It's not a cinematic reunion. There's no grand trumpet of enlightenment. Instead, it's subtle, ordinary, almost awkward. You wake up one morning and realize that your calendar is emptier, but so is your mind. There are fewer texts, but also fewer obligations. The silence that once screamed now hums with relief. What's left is space. And that space, terrifying at first, slowly becomes sacred. Because now, you begin the deeper work. Not just shedding roles, but asking, who am I without them? It's like standing in a room full of clothes you no longer wear, wondering which ones still fit the person you're becoming. This part of the journey isn't about rebellion. It's about return. You start to remember the girl you were before the world told you who to be. The one who asked big questions, who felt things deeply, who dreamed without apology. She wasn't naive, she was untouched, and the world mistook her innocence for weakness, when really, it was her truest form of strength. As you walk this path, you realize that self-love isn't a bubble bath or a mantra. It's a series of hard choices. It's refusing to shrink to keep the peace. It's setting boundaries without guilt. It's choosing solitude over shallow connection. It's being okay with not being understood. Because here's the thing, not everyone deserves access to you. Your energy is not a free buffet, it's sacred real estate. And when you've spent years renting it out for validation, reclaiming it feels both empowering and terrifying. You stop chasing people who can't hear you. You stop over-explaining your worth. You stop auditioning for rooms you no longer want to be in. And in that stillness, something wild happens. Your intuition sharpens. You begin to trust yourself in ways you never imagined. You listen to your gut, not because it's trendy, but because it's earned your trust. You recognize when a yes is really a no with a smile. You catch yourself before you abandon yourself. You pause before saying, "I'm fine," when your chest is screaming otherwise. This is not about becoming perfect. It's about becoming honest. And honesty isn't just what you speak. It's what you choose. The job you stay in, the love you accept, the silence you tolerate, the version of yourself you wake up to every day. You start to realize that being misunderstood is not the worst thing. Being disconnected from yourself is. So you begin to choose discomfort over dishonesty. You learn to sit with the awkward pause instead of filling it with a lie. You let people misread your silence without rushing to clarify. You accept that growth may look like distance to those who only knew you by your wounds. But you also start to rebuild, slowly, intentionally. You make room for laughter that doesn't come from performance, for joy that isn't followed by guilt, for rest that isn't earned, for relationships that feel like home, not a battleground. And one day, without noticing, you realize you're no longer just surviving, you're living. There is a strange, almost disorienting silence that arrives when you stop betraying yourself. It's not the kind of silence that fills a quiet room. It's the kind that echoes through your entire being. A stillness that arises not from peace, but from finally ceasing the endless noise of pretending, pleasing, and performing. You stop attending the gatherings that require your laughter to feel forced. You no longer laugh too loudly at jokes that make your soul wince. The party invitations slow down, not because you're forgotten, but because you've stopped being what they needed you to be. And for the first time, you're okay with that, because you're no longer interested in being a decoration in someone else's life. You're not here to fill the silence, to make things easier for others, to smooth the sharp edges of discomfort. You are no longer available for roles that cost you your truth. But freedom, real freedom, doesn't come in golden light or triumphant music. It comes in waves of grief. You grieve the comfort of your former camouflage. You grieve the version of you that made everyone else feel safe while you were drowning in your own unsaid truths. You grieve the easy validation that came from being agreeable, from being digestible, from being small. It hurts to walk away from your own echo. Because for years, that version of you, high-performing, over-explaining, always available, wasn't just an act. It was a survival strategy. It was the armor you forged in childhood and polished in adulthood. She got you through 1,000 rooms. She kept you loved. She kept you safe. But she also kept you invisible. Now without her, you begin to feel the weight of your full presence. You speak, and your voice doesn't tremble, not because you're fearless, but because you've chosen your fear over your silence. You sit with discomfort instead of pacifying it. You allow your no to be enough. You let your anger have a seat at the table, not to destroy, but to witness what was long denied. And that's where the shift begins. The world doesn't clap for this kind of growth. There are no applause lines for the woman who chooses herself quietly. But in the solitude of that choice, you find something louder than approval. You find alignment. Your energy no longer leaks into endless explanations. Your boundaries become less of a defense and more of a declaration. Your relationships shift, not because you've become colder, but because you've become clearer. You stop romanticizing potential. You stop confusing emotional labor with connection. You stop making yourself small so that others won't feel insecure. You begin choosing truth over harmony, integrity over belonging, depth over convenience. And yes, people leave, sometimes the ones you love the most. But here's what's truer than loss. What remains is real. What stays is sacred. You start attracting the kinds of people who don't need you to wear a mask. Conversations that nourish instead of drain. Love that asks for nothing but your presence, not your performance. You wake up and realize you've built a life that doesn't require constant escape. You sit at your own table, not because no one else invited you, but because you finally realized you were the host all along. This isn't a story of triumph in the traditional sense. It's not about becoming more. It's about unbecoming everything you were never meant to be. It's about the slow, often silent revolution of choosing yourself again and again. Even when the cost is high and the crowd is thin, you begin to understand peace isn't found in perfection. It's found in permission. The permission to be messy, to be misunderstood, to not always have the right words, to change your mind, to rest. You give up chasing certainty and begin to fall in love with clarity. You no longer need all the answers. just the courage to stay in the questions. You stop chasing the next milestone, the next title, the next badge of worth. You start measuring success by how honest you feel in your own skin. And in that raw, imperfect truth, you find something extraordinary. Your life becomes your own, not a projection, not a performance, not a reaction, but a living, breathing, evolving reflection of who you really are. And maybe that's the most revolutionary act of all. Not burning it all down in anger, but walking away in quiet clarity. Not because you're bitter, but because you're finally, blessedly, done. Done seeking approval, done performing perfection, done trading your essence for comfort. Now, you walk, not toward applause, but toward peace. And when you arrive, you'll realize you never had to become anyone else. You just had to come home.